So without further ado, I present to you Bethany Finch. Bethany.
Hey, well, glad to be here. Thank you so much. Let's see, if I were to do a quick 30-second speech, it would be something along the lines of been investing 25 years, lived a lot, learned a lot, fell down a lot, got back up a lot. And in doing so, we do have 4 businesses. We have a single family renovation, multifamily syndication, executive rental business, and a credit hacking business. So all of the above, they all work in symbiosis with each other, and not only continues to help pay the bills, but our entire mission statement at our company is to create sustainable growth in every single market we are in, that we can further the kingdom of God. So that is the whole premise behind everything we do. It doesn't always make sense to some, but usually God's ways are not always our ways, right? So I thought it might be a little bit more fun. So I am very visual, and it's hard to sometimes just listen. So I'm going to share my screen here. I worked hard for the last little bit just to be able to do this for you guys, just because it is always more fun when you can see something. There we go. Okay, so I want to take you on a road trip. It's so much easier now with everything I have going on with us being the remote RV investor, that most people understand the concept of a road trip. And real estate investing is a road trip. It's not always about the destination you're going to, it's about the trip along the way. So we want to focus on the true price tag of being a real estate investor. So many times you hear people talk about how great it was and how much money they made here and how successful they was, and it just took off really quickly and things of that nature. But that's just not always the truth of it. That's just what they're willing to share with you. So if you guys are okay with that, I'll take you on a little road trip, my road trip. So this is a little bit about our journey. So my kids we are a normal family, 2 kids. They're grown and old now, 26 and 21. So like I said a few minutes ago, they're getting ready to, one's moving to the East Coast and the other one's staying on the West Coast. But they have grown up in this real estate business, and it's not just one. At one point I've had 6 businesses. I scaled back down to 4. And so we've coached, we've worked with other kids, we've done some weird and crazy stuff with our kids just to do it. So we drove up to the Canadian border so we could get a picture with our feet in 2 places at the same time. And just little weird things like that. We're a typical family. We're not any superheroes. We're not anything. We're just normal people, except our dog Blue. He's a little weird. He's a little bit of a Jedi. So that's what he is down here. But this is our RV. This is what we travel around the country. We went 100% remote in 2020. And we did that because when COVID shut everything down and our teams all across the country were starting to suffer, and the airlines thought it was their place to dictate to our business how many times we could get on or off and when and how and all of that. So the Lord showed us that we needed to get an RV and we needed to go to our teams. And it was a huge boost to our teams because they knew what we had to go through to get to them. And it was one of the best things we ever did. But that was 2 years ago. We thought I was only going to be for 6 months, and we're still going. So the Lord has not shown us to stop as of yet. But along the way, you never know what is out there until you get out there. I don't know how many of you guys have seen the Grand Canyon in person, but when you look at it in pictures, it looks cool. It looks like, okay, it's a cool canyon, but it's not as awe-inspiring as it is in person. When you actually get up close and you're looking over the edge of the Grand Canyon, or you're looking down from the bottom up through the Grand Canyon, it suddenly is much more awe-inspiring. But you don't necessarily know that when you're just looking at a picture. So sometimes it's about getting out there and finding things out. And too many times we just don't know what we don't know. And so we don't know what's actually out there until we get out there. My husband hates to fly, so he was all about the RV and was excited about that. But there was things that he needed to learn along the way and things that he kind of took for granted. So there's a process to everything that we do in life. And that process, or education, as you might want to call it, has a price tag that's attached. So the road to success at times is paved with the best laid plans. I heard a couple of you guys, Phil, Peter, Eric, I think you guys were all referring to the fact that you're newbies, you're just starting out. I think one of you is talking about possibly becoming a capital raiser for multifamily. I'm not sure if the other one, I think Peter, the single dad, you were not really sure exactly where you were going to go with the journey, whether it was going to be single family or multifamily, but each of you will have a different step. And in doing that, you'll look at those plans and you'll create plans, and you're hoping to bring this. You're hoping to bring in the dollars from those plans. But sometimes they come with different dollars. The best remembered lessons always have a price tag. So these are some live examples of different price tags that we are never going to forget these lessons. So this first picture, it's a little distorted. My assistant will never forgive me if I let her see this slide presentation, so I'm not going to ever show it to her. The house doesn't really look as skinny as it is. It's just distorted, but I'm not the technology person. I just was able to get it in there in time. This is our very, very first single family flip. Now, the reason it says $22,045 is because that's how much it cost me in learning that you should always let the contract be the bad guy. And I say that for this. I did this very first flip in partnership with my brother, who owns a construction company. I thought this is going to be easy. Well, at the end of the day, he was a nervous Nelly and didn't want to put any risk out there. So he wanted us to just pay him like a regular contractor. So in the contract, we wrote up the payment schedule, we signed all of this. Well, then he kept going over and kept going over and kept going over. And at the end of the day, when the property sold, he thinks we made like $200,000. He doesn't actually see every itemization of our HUD statement. He doesn't see all the expenses we incurred. He doesn't see any part of that. He just sees the sales price. And he thinks we made like $200,000, which is not the case. And in fact, this particular project cost me $22,045 because my brother went so far over on budget that I had to eat that cost. And that's what he doesn't know that. He knows he went over. He knows it was extra. He knows it was more time. But when we try to show him, he doesn't want to see it. So for me, this is a number I'm never going to forget because I want to keep my brother. And it's not worth it for me to partner with him. And consequently, we don't. We no longer partner on any projects. And I always want the contract to be the bad guy because at the end of the day, if these are in projects that are in areas where I see these contractors all the time, I want to be able to see them in the supermarket and me not have to run and duck and hide. I want to be able to hold my head up and let the contract be the bad guy, keep business, and personal outside of that. So that was a learning lesson, thankfully, very, very quickly. This learning lesson here is a flip that we did, but it's a little bit hard for you to see, but can you see right here what looks like a driveway? There's an actual gate here at the end. This is a driveway, and this is a carport for this driveway. This was a $26,000, $200 learning lesson for us because what we did not know is that this L shape is actually part of an easement. It's a utilities easement. And although the previous owner always let them use it as a driveway, the moment we bought the property, the next door neighbor who owns that easement, it's just an easement. He actually owns this parcel of land, refused to let us use it as a driveway anymore. It was done. And so now we had to, when we went to go sell, it was going to cost us $26,200 to either one, buy out his easement rights, which he wasn't willing to sell, or two, sell the property without a driveway. How many people want a property without a driveway? Not very many. So that was definitely a learning lesson for us that, again, we're not going to forget that. So now we look at all those easements. We read all the title policy and all the different things that are in there. We pay attention to that because it can cost us on the backside. Coincidentally, this property itself did a few more things that cost us even. It didn't necessarily cost us out of pocket, but what we found out is, so this property was being marketed by an agent to include this easement. And then we found out it didn't include it. And so now our property is even smaller. So this property is literally just about as big as this house. That's it. It's a super tiny, like 2,000 square foot lot, super, super tiny in a commercial district. While we were buying the property, the city rezoned it to a commercial district. So that causes problems for the lending. Lenders don't like residential properties in commercial districts. So I thought, well, no big deal. I'll just find out from the city what I can build on it, and I'll just build it up. I'll turn it into a duplex, or I'll do something different. Come to find out, the moment I went to the city, how do I want to say this? The city was filled with a bunch of good old boys. And those good old boys started talking amongst themselves and figured out what they could do with my property. So they, instead of, basically they showed me the code and what I could do, but they, instead of working with me, worked against me. So I explained my plan was to purchase the property behind me and beside me, and I was going to build a 16 unit here. And so the moment they started seeing what I was going to do, they started reaching out to the guy behind me and the guy beside me, and they scooped up their properties. Well, then, do you think I wanted to sell my property to them the moment they did this? Absolutely not. And I did not. And I dug my heels in. I thought, oh, well, basically you need my property now to do what you want to do. And I knew that. So I just dug my heels in. Instead, this became my first executive rental. This town was maybe 1,000 people, and I turned it into an executive rental, the very first one in that area. And I literally made sure I paid my hotel and lodging tax to the city, so they saw it every single month. They saw my taxes come in to just kind of spur them on and remind them what's happening with my property. And that was actually one of the best money-making deals we ever had. We ended up making over 6 digits on this property, all because we found out information that was wrong. We didn't dive deep enough. We didn't do a good enough job on our due diligence. We had to find another workaround. And then others thought they could sabotage us, kind of like the airlines with wanting to shut down during COVID. And instead, we just found another workaround and found another workaround. And so, like I said, that was one of our most profitable properties. This one here, the $132,000. So you guys may not be able to see it on your end. This is the State of Washington Department of Labor and Industries. What you may or may not recognize here is this is what's called a HUD tag. So manufactured homes are all considered personal property. They're vehicles. So they're actually registered with the DMV of all things. This particular property was in the state of Washington. In the state of Washington, once it is set down on a property, it has to get a permit that says it's livable. And so the Department of Labor and Industries comes out and they determine if it's livable or not. So you have to have this tag on there. And if it's consequently gone, it is a nightmare. Well, part of this tag is attached to the title. And if you don't have the title, you can't reference this, you can't do anything with this. So the state requires you to go back and dig up and file for a title or file for a lost title. And in this case, we were looking to purchase a property, a manufactured home that, once again, we saw this, so we thought, oh, not a problem. We're good to go. Unfortunately, the owner did not have his title. And this was right at the start of COVID. And we're just like, okay, we'll just wait it out. Everything's kind of locked down right now. No big deal. We'll give it time. Just work on it and let us know. We'll just stay under contract until you get it figured out. So 6 months goes by. He never figures it out. He never finds it. The city, everybody is shut down because of COVID. At that point, COVID's starting to come out. The city's starting to respond. He finally hears back about 9 months into it. And we hear back that it's going to be a 2-year process. So at that point, we don't want to sit around and wait for 2 years. We're willing to if he wants, but we'll do it. In the end, this property would have cost us $132,000 that we literally would have thrown out the window because we would have had to sit on that property for 2 years. We wouldn't have been able to occupy it. We wouldn't have been able to put a tenant in there. We wouldn't have been able to do anything but literally let it sit vacant for 2 years. So thankfully, while we waited at that point when he knew it was going to be 2 years, he just decided to rescind the contract. But this is what it would have cost us, was $132,000. So each one of those are definitely things we're not necessarily going to forget anytime soon, for sure. I'm sure you guys can think of different price tags and things you've learned along the way. If you think through, many of you guys have children. When your kids are growing up, it seems like every year, one of our kids, we always had ER visits, but there's a time in their life when they're growing so fast. It never fails. That's when they're breaking bones because they're kind of clumsy and they fall. And so it seemed like every year we could almost gauge when the ER visits were going to happen. And so we literally learned out which ERs had the shortest average time. We learned the average time at the hospital. We learned all of this, right? Because as parents, you have to pay attention to some of this. And sometimes when you have to communicate with a boss or something and you have to let them know, I have to take my kid to the ER, things like that. If you can tell them, my background is it's historically been 4 hours. I'm just giving you a heads up. I'm not probably going to make it back before 4 hours. Just an FYI. That goes a long way and it makes a difference. A lot of times it helped my husband who needed to sometimes take off because he was the one having to take him because I couldn't get out or whatever. It allowed for him to not have as many problems at work. But those had price tags involved. Those ER visits were not cheap, right? So many times when we look at our plans, we kind of look at a map and we set out our route. Now we have a GPS. We didn't have a GPS. Lawrence and I can testify. GPS has not always been around. And even if you had a map, sometimes it wasn't always accurate. It depends how current or updated it was. And now you guys can pull up GPS pretty easily and it's not a problem. Google tells you where to go. And we all know sometimes Google is wrong. Sometimes they're just wrong. But you don't necessarily know what's always around the corner. It tells you the destination, but it doesn't necessarily tell you sometimes if there's a bend in the road or there's a steep grade right there or guardrail is out or things like this. So if you're flying down a backcountry road, 85 miles an hour, if you're not paying any attention to signs, you literally could go off of a cliff. We have definitely been on roads like that. So you don't learn that necessarily unless you just do it often enough. You actually go out and you hit the road and you start to recognize and realize, oh, with this decline, I'm probably going to be coming across some sharp turns or I'm going to be dealing with some speed accelerations. I need to start paying attention to my signs. And as you gain more experience and you get out on the road, you actually figure a few things out. So that's what's happened for us as real estate investors throughout this whole process. In all the years, we've learned things. Now, if you saw the previous lessons that we learned were much smaller price tags along there. But here, you look at this first one, $196,385. That was an expensive one. Well, this price tag is attached to a property that we didn't get to close on. It was a property that we were buying. It was a multifamily, and we learned a whole lot of lessons. So that $196,000 has a lot of lessons along with it. And some of the lessons that we learned along the way is everything is negotiable. Even what the lender tells you is negotiable. And our lender literally kept trying to retrade with us. And what you don't know sometimes is that when you're doing big multifamily projects, there's usually about 3 lawyers involved. And this particular lender was constantly every week made us get on a call with their attorney, with our attorneys, and then they were charging all of their attorney fees to us. So they could care less what that number was. Well, that was $50,000 alone just to the attorney's fees. It was absolutely absurd, but we didn't realize that that's negotiable. We could have figured all that out ahead of time and negotiated something different. We didn't know that. We literally just accepted whatever the lender handed to us. And this is how this price tag ended up being so much. So then when this lender didn't inform us, but the team that they put on our project was a brand new team for them. They'd only been working with the company for 2 weeks. They didn't have anybody experienced on their team. And so because of that, they blew through 3 of our extensions. First off, that we didn't even have negotiated because the seller said absolutely no extensions. But we ended up having to get 3 extensions, and these lenders blew through them with no remorse, no anything. And ultimately, it cost us the deal, because then 3 days before closing, again, the lender screwed up again, didn't get their ducks in a row, didn't have anything. And because they didn't have the documents ready, they were pulling out of the deal. They literally pulled the funding and said, nope, we're not going to fund you. At that point, if we would have had any of our extensions, we could have got the deal done. We already had another lender lined up. It would have been no brainer. We could have closed in 2 weeks. But because they ruined that with our seller, and they ruined all of the chances that we had in our reputation and credibility, this $196,385 is a total of our EMD monies that we lost, is a total of legal fees and attorney fees we had to pay, is a total of inspection reports and different things. All of these things on this one deal, but a lot of lessons that we learned. We wouldn't have learned that had we not gone through that process. Everybody that we talked to that's in the industry had never heard of some of the crazy stuff that was going on with us. So now we know that, and we can advise others and encourage others, by all means, look, we've been there, done that. Start negotiating. Don't let the lender be thinking that they're in charge, because they need to get their money out. You need to have money, but it doesn't always have to be from them. And so in this next one, it's a much smaller price tag. Just looks like a normal fire hydrant, right? What most people don't realize is that on multifamily properties, you have multiple fire hydrants on the property. And some properties, they're city owned. Some properties, you own them if you buy that property. And what oftentimes happens is, before us multifamily property can be closed, oftentimes the fire marshal has to come out and give an inspection sign off that everything is good. And we had a situation on a property where the fire marshal came out. We had no idea that we owned the fire hydrants. We assumed it was the city. We had no idea. And it ended up costing us $23,232 because we owned all of them, and every single one of them had to be reserviced. So that was the ticket price that we had to get that done before closing. They wouldn't close without it being done. So it wasn't we'll get it done sometime down the road. It was, you're not closing unless this happens. So it was a pretty big hit that we were not aware of, we were not paying attention to, but it was easily avoidable. Now we know, right? So fire hydrants are always on our check sheet now. The next one here, $12,436 actually was fairly cheap. This, what you may or may not be able to see here, it's actually like a French drain system. So this is coming off of a multifamily property. This is the basement unit of the property. And what the previous owner had done was he took the gutter, and instead of the footer drains all became plugged. Instead of clearing the footer drains, he ran this, basically this line down to another drain, which happens to be right in front of the resident's door. So what was happening is this drain also was plugged. So all the drains all around the entire building were completely plugged, and nothing was draining. So every time it rained, obviously this entire thing turned into a giant puddle. Water was going into the unit at times. Obviously the tenant wasn't a fan of walking through a puddle every single time. But the bigger challenge on this property was that it was a property, and you guys probably have seen them in your neighborhoods and things, where they kind of build it on a hillside. So if you drive in on the street side, the bunch of the property, maybe 2 stories, is above, and then there's a backside, and that's below ground, so to speak, but it's just the way the property was built. That's what this was. So all of the groundwater now was being redirected to the property itself. So this $12,436 was where we had to come alongside and figure out, first off, can we just unplug those drains? Is it possible at this point? How many years? This particular property was over 100 years old. So undoing those drains was not going to happen. The second part was, is there a city drain that we can divert water to? There is a city drain that we could divert water to. The problem was it was 100 feet away. So what we ultimately ended up having to do was dig a French drain around the entire front half of the property. So when all of that groundwater came into the property, then we redirected that French drain, back out to the city drain at the end. Ultimately, the reason this was cheap was because once I understood the concept of what needed to happen, I stopped dealing with all the excavation companies who would normally do this, because theirs was 25,000 and up. That was the cheapest. And I just called up one of my buddies and I said, "Hey, you have a backhoe, don't you?" And he says, "Yeah, I need you." I said, "Great. I need you to dig me a hole." He's like, "What?" And so I literally sketched it out and told him exactly what I need to do. And he's like, "Oh, I can do that." He said, "Not only can I do that, I'll lay the French drain and I'll bring in the gravel." I'm like, "Perfect." So it was even better. So it worked out much, much better than we anticipated. And we learned a lot along the way. Like, many of you guys may not know that your city or county roads department oftentimes sells gravel. And we were able to get pea gravel in there at dirt cheap for semi truckloads full. And so we needed about 4 semi truckloads full. So all we had to do was call them up, and they delivered it. And then he took his backhoe and spread it out and did everything we needed. So it was perfect, but we didn't know that at the time. We just thought, oh, you just call a contractor. And again, we had to find another workaround, because if we wouldn't have bought the property, we never would have known this. So we had to hit the road, right? We had to get there. We had to figure this out. But then we also needed to figure out a solution that tried to stay in budget, because there's no way we could have afforded another $25,000 to $40,000 on that. It would have sank the entire deal at that point. So this was a big one. But here is the all-time biggest one. This is one I will never forget. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but do you see where it says 64 million? Yeah, that number is accurate. So what you may or may not be able to see is that this is SCAD, the School of Art and Design Institute there in Savannah, Georgia. It's a very, very prestigious art school. They have a waiting list every single year. It's in high demand. The town is pretty much supported by that school. There's so many jobs and so many things that happen because of that school. So it's a big deal. So when we get there, I realized there's a whole bunch of properties in that town that are vacant and boarded up and graffitied. And it was obvious that the school needed more housing. They needed more student housing. And so I was like, oh, well, that's perfect. I'm just going to get a hold of this. I'll turn this into student housing and I will sell it off. So I got a hold of a property while I was on vacation with my niece, and I put it under contract. My contract was for $2 million. I was buying this property and I was going to convert it to student housing. What I didn't know is how exactly that was going to look. I'd never done student housing at this point. I knew enough how to get the deal under contract. I knew enough to make sure there were some long timelines on it. And I knew enough that I just needed to go find somebody else who knew more. So my plan was, I'll just team up with somebody else who has done student housing, and then we'll be able to do this together. It'll be great. So I called a local law school there and started asking some questions about this to them, and got some great advice, great tips, great wisdom, and proceeded to let my contract go. I didn't get things done and figured out in time, and basically I didn't lose my earnest money, but I just didn't close it, didn't make the deal happen. So consequently, about a year later, I'm driving down and I hear on the radio of all things, how likely is it that anybody's going to hear anything on the radio? But I actually did. And what I heard was the school, School of Arts and Design there in Savannah, that they just signed a contract for $64 million for their student housing project that they bought from that law school. Yeah, that law school that gave me all the great advice turned around and took the great advice they gave me and implemented it. They hit the road. I stopped, went out, took a potty break, and they hit the road. So while I was goofing off and not paying any attention, they capitalized on it big time. Now remember, I only had the property for $2 million. They sold it for $64 million to the School of Arts and Design. Dang. So it's definitely not something I'm going to miss. I'm going to remember that always. But it taught me a lot about confidentiality agreements, really paying attention to kind of the motivation of others and things like that. So there's a lot of other lessons along there that I learned as well. But the biggest one was literally hit the road. Like I started, but then I stopped and I just stayed there. And if I would have just kept moving forward, I may not have made 64 million, but I definitely would have probably got, 10 million, maybe more, which would have been, huge. I just got off the road. I just stopped moving forward and just got off the road. So there's a lot of lessons that I learned with that one for sure. But I love this one because so many times when we're looking at our road trip, whether it's real estate investing, whether it's life, we have different goals that we're working towards. Maybe it's literally, I remember times in our life where we were just trying to get qualified for a car loan. We had horrible credit. We didn't understand anything about credit. And we finally got approved for a loan, but we paid 29% interest just to get the deal done. But we needed a car. And that was just one car. That wasn't like we had two cars. That was literally just so our family could have one car and my husband could get back and forth to work. So it was a big deal for us to actually get approved for that car loan. But I learned a lot of lessons along the way about that too. And thankfully, we didn't keep that car loan very long. We did refinance it. But we had to learn about credit, learn about the importance of being bankable, and learn about all these different things that went into that. Then there's also times where many of you might want to just have a rental portfolio, and then you might want them all to be single family because you're going to manage them yourselves. You may not want to go into multifamily like we do. You may want to just stay with single family, and you might want them to be just in the town that you're in, and that may be all you want to do. And that's okay. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We've just learned lessons along the way, and one of the biggest lessons is you're going to do the exact same amount of work on a single family that you do on a multifamily, only you don't get paid as well on a single family. So we've just learned there's differences in that area. So one of the things too, that your goal may only be to be just like this, just another person in the crowd. You don't want to stand out. You just want to get by. You just want to live life. But although that may be a goal that you're okay with, many times, if we just accept status quo, we don't often realize how much we're missing out on. Life is so much more fun. Life is so much more rewarding when, one, you do it with community, which is this up here. This is community. We are very, very community oriented. And it's just like when you have a party. If nobody comes to your party, that's not a fun party. But if everybody comes to your party, it's a great time and everybody has fun. And when we're open and willing to learn and accept community and work through that, oftentimes what happens is our lives are so much more rich and full and rewarded, honestly, because of that. This part I like about the gratitude is because with all of those learning lessons, each one of them had a price tag, but the gratitude was the best learning lesson out of all of them. If we stop looking at lessons that we've learned in life as negative or bad things and instead be thankful for them, am I thankful that I made, that $64 million one? 100%. Because now when I'm tempted to get back off the road, I remember 64 million and I stay the course. When I have to look at, a drainage issue or something of that nature, I remember the French drains and look and go, okay, is there another option here? Is there another way we can get this done and still stay within budget? And I'm thankful for those. I'm thankful that I can look back at those and I can remember them. But when I look back at them at the time going through them, it didn't feel good. I wasn't thankful I was going through it at the time. I'm thankful after I got through it, right? The times that I'm actually doing better about being thankful when I'm going through it, I find it doesn't feel as painful as it did those times when I was ungrateful about it. For those of you that are very much involved in the community, whether it's in this case it's military or just service to your community and your churches in your neighborhoods, different things like that, when you run a business, it can be all encumbersome. And if you don't balance your life, so it's not just everything business, like I said, my kids grew up with me running businesses. So if I'm not careful, my kids are going to hate business altogether because then, oh, the business is what took their mom away and they don't see the value of it. So the same is true in our communities. We want to always remember that others are always watching us and they're always going to look at you and see and learn from you, or good or bad, right? They're going to learn from my $64 million mistake, or they're going to learn from, Bethany had a great attitude when it cost her $186,000, on a deal she didn't get to close on. Everybody is watching in a community, and there's always going to be somebody, whether it's your kids, whether it's other investors, there's always going to be somebody. And as a goal, honestly, I don't think I know anybody who wants to have a bad reputation. Everybody wants to have a good reputation. They want to be well thought of. They want to be remembered at a funeral. They want to not have an empty place. They want to have lots of people show up and remember them with good memories. And those things come when we hit the road, when we get out there, when we take the time and make that a priority. And just like here, remember how I said in the beginning, you don't know what you don't know? And this is our very first cruise. We had never been on a cruise. And because of our businesses, because of what I've worked so hard for all these years, when our daughter graduated, our first one, when she graduated, we were able to go on a cruise to the Caribbean for her graduation, trip that we took each kid on a graduation trip. And the memories that we created and the new experiences that we all got to experience together as a family was absolutely priceless. So even though I had a lot of price tags along the way that I had to learn from, money is just a tool, and how we use our tools will determine how we move forward. And one of the things that we forget, because too many times people feel that their value is tied up with whatever's in the bank account, but that's not truly your value. Not as an individual, not as a parent, not as a spouse. That's not your value at all. It's just a tool, just like your vehicles are, or just like your house is. It's just a tool, it's just a resource. Time is just as equally important. And the time that my business allowed me to be able to create this, so we have those memories to look back on for her graduation. She worked hard to graduate. We wanted to reward that with something equally as rewarding. So it was extremely fun, extremely exciting, but it was also hard work and lots of learning lessons along the way. So definitely hit the road for sure. Get out there, learn some things, whether it's single family, whether it's multifamily, it doesn't matter what it is. You can do it with any of it. I called this one the Great Escape because many times people think that they need to be a real estate investor because they know they need more retirement income or things of that nature, but they think they have to learn it all and do it all themselves. You don't have to do any of it. If you have a great job and you absolutely love that job, or you just want to supplement some retirement income, or you want to create a legacy for your kids, for you to be able to do that, there is a much, much easier route, learning from all of my mistakes and teaming up with people like me who have learned. So what this link here is, and I will put it in the chat, this link is actually a free download of an ebook that I've written about the 16 things you need to be aware of when it comes to passive income investment opportunities. Passive income refers to an investment that you're not doing the work on. You're just investing in somebody else is doing the work. So for instance, our multifamily syndications, we go out and buy the huge multifamily properties. We just closed on Jacksonville, 117 units. We paid $22 million. That's probably not something any of us have sitting around. And so what we do is we work together with other investors who don't want to do any of the work, don't want to learn all the things that we know. They want us to do all of that. So they come alongside with us, we syndicate, we put all the money together. Like I said, we have 3 lawyers on watching every little thing all along the way. And then we buy this $22 million property. And the nice part about that is they didn't have to do anything but sign, fund, move it along, and then read our reports that we send out. So that's what this is. This is an ebook that explains the 16 different things that you need to ask if you're going to evaluate a passive income opportunity. And the reason I always encourage everybody to do that, is because sometimes the fastest, easiest way to learn is by passively sitting on the sidelines, listening to the coach, listening to him make all the plays and the calls. You're going to learn a whole lot faster. So as passive investors on our deals, you learn the whole process a whole lot faster. You also get invited to walking properties and things like that. You also get to be involved in different meetings and whatnot, that if you weren't invested in it, you wouldn't be a part of it. So education always has a price tag, whether it's learned the hard way, right, like the lessons I showed, or whether it's by going to school. One of our education programs that we did was $50,000. That was a hefty price tag. I made it back on the first deal, but it was a hefty price tag to come up with, to determine. Now, when you're invested in something at $50,000, you're going to take it serious. And I hit the ground running because of it. So it was a huge gain for us because I actually implemented the education that I'm learning there. So let me put this link in there. And if you guys have any other questions, I'm happy to take any of those questions right now.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Bethany, for a fantastic presentation, right? Because I was just taking some notes. And I said to myself, there's a quote that says, there's a price for education and a price for ignorance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're doing you talk about gratitude and attitude, right? When these things happen, right? When you felt that certain way, right? When you felt that certain way, how did you overcome those feelings?
Well, that too is a process. Okay. So at one point, I remember it's 2 a.m. I'm laying on the floor. I'm bawling my eyes out in a property that I just fired my 8th contractor on, and I am feeling 100% defeated. I'm feeling like I'm not going to get this deal done, and I'm going to let my family down. I'm going to lose all this money. It's going to be horrible. And I'm pulling my eyes out. Thankfully, I did have a coaching call scheduled. Oftentimes, you have to schedule those things out. I had a coaching call scheduled for 5 a.m. because it was East Coast, and so it would have been 2 a.m. my time. So I get on my coaching call, and the best thing that coach said to me was exactly what she said. And she says, okay, I'm trying to suck it all up, and I'm not crying. I'm not, and try to make all of that look good. And she could hear it in my voice. And she said, okay, Bethany, so it sounds like we're not talking about curriculum today. What are we talking about? So of course, then I spill it all out and let her know. And after, she literally says, are you done? I said, yeah, I think so, right? And she said, Bethany, you need to understand, out of all the deals you do in 1 year, 10% of the time, you're probably going to bring money to the table. Nobody always gets a base hit. Nobody always gets a home run. Nobody always gets a hit. And that's because not everything goes 100% according to plan. So she said, expect it. 10% of all the deals you do in a year, expect to lose money. And I said, well, so if I lost all this money on this deal right now, I'd be good for the whole rest of the year. Okay. I mean, it just immediately changed my perspective to know, okay, it's okay to lose money. It's okay. It's just part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And then I literally had to, in 2 hours, get on a plane and get down to another event, another learning event. And I was exhausted. I hadn't slept in that point in 24 hours. I was a zombie, but I did it and I went through it. And when I got done at the end of the first day of the conference and I was just about ready to go to sleep, one of the things she also told me was write down how you're feeling in the last 24 hours. So I went in that 24-hour time from being utterly destroyed, completely an emotional wreck, feeling hopeless, to suddenly feeling hope-filled, encouraged, motivated, and had a plan I was already up and running and moving down the road, and I had the plan in place. So it was huge to be able to write that out and look back at that. Now, didn't mean it felt great at the time, but it was just part of the process. So now when I go through it, like right now, we're dealing with another, we literally on our RV, we were in our park and we were getting ready to leave and our slides would not come in. If you know anything about RVs, ours has 4 slides extensions on the side, and then they come in and then you drive away. Ours didn't come in, and we're supposed to be out of there at noon. So we literally went all over the websites, looked through all the manuals, called all the dealers, called the no help, nothing. Finally, we figured out how to manually push them in. We had to get 6 of our buddies out there. They all had to literally heave ho, push them in. And then when we started driving down the road, the slides started coming out. So then we had to set up a convoy and we had to watch for the slides and all of that. And one of my friends commented, Bethany, I cannot believe you're laughing about this. And I'm like, are you kidding? This is hysterical. I can totally imagine what everybody driving by is thinking about this.
Mm-hmm.
And if I take it too seriously, right, feeling like, oh no, it's devastation. We can't do this. We can't do this. We can't do this. The world is over. I'm going to walk in that mindset and it's going to make it worse than it is. But because I was able to laugh it off, it is what it is. I'm not going to be able to change it. If we have to put flags on the side and mark it as wide load, the state patrol is going to have to escort me or something because I'm getting on the road. We'll figure it out. So it's literally learning how to adjust your mindset. And that has definitely been the biggest. If you can adjust your mindset, you can get through anything. And I've been through some horrible, crazy stuff that most people, it would have just ripped them apart. And that's just because of the mindset. Because I've had to learn along the way, it's always better if you can change your mindset.
So, one more question before I put the floor. There's some people here. There's some people here who are new, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest to people who are just looking to get started, people who are beginners? Then what would you say to do? What should they be doing as far as for the mindset? What books they should be reading, and about coaching?
So one of the things that I tell people is every year you need to look at what things do I need to learn this year. We as business owners, you plan out your year. In school, the teachers have to plan out their whole lessons for the whole school year, what tasks we're accomplishing. And if you step back and you look at your life this year, what do I need to focus on? If your kids are becoming teenagers and you've never had teenagers before, maybe you want to focus on how to parent a teenager. Trust me, it's a whole nother ball of wax. Maybe you need to start teaching driver's ed. You need to start teaching your kids how to drive. Or maybe they're getting ready to leave the nest and you've never talked about finances with them. You've never done budgeting with them. You've never talked any of this kind of stuff. So when we look at as our family and as individuals, we should always look at each year as its own unit and go, okay, for me, it's literally, I take a whole weekend and we pray and we go out in where there's no technology and we pray and, okay, Lord, what things do I need to learn this year? And so once we figure out, okay, what things we need to focus on this year as individuals, sometimes for me, it's learning how to pray for my husband so I don't kill him and I instead pray. Other times it might be, I remember one of the best books I ever read was Lord, help me change my attitude before it's too late, right? How not to sabotage yourself. And your attitude and mindset plays a factor in that. Other times it was how to stay motivated. Well, you can't stay motivated when you don't ever have the end goal in mind. So sometimes it's setting the goals. I don't know about you guys, but I was one of those kids that I saw people set their goals and then I saw them be so upset and mad when they never achieved their goals. So I determined at a young age, well, there's no reason to set a goal then. That sounds stupid. If I just don't set a goal, I won't be disappointed. I thought I was making a different conclusion there. Thankfully, a coach came alongside me and helped me work through that. And what she explained was when we set a goal, it's not always about hitting the goal. It's about where we are in the process. And oftentimes, just by setting a goal, we move forward down that road and it puts us further ahead than if we would have never set that goal in the first place. So there's still forward momentum, there's still progress. It just may not be all the way to achieving that particular goal. So once she reframed that for me and I understood that. So as individuals starting out, if you guys are looking at real estate investing as a whole, I think Eric talked about possibly doing some capital raising and whatnot for multifamily. Raising capital for multifamily is actually the title of a book by Hunter Thompson, phenomenal teacher, very, very good information in there. If you're interested in learning kind of the ins and outs, I would always suggest that you don't just filter through what you know. For instance, maybe you've got a bunch of friends and they have single family rentals. If you start talking to them, you probably hear them vent about all the problems and all the complaining. And so that's all you're going to know, and you're going to filter everything through that. So I would suggest that you learn more about real estate investing in both single family, in multifamily, in storage units, things like that, so that you figure out which lane you want to first be in. So I would encourage you, if you're just starting out, pick up a few different books on real estate investing. So let me pull up. I actually have a book list. I read usually 3 to 4 books a week. And that's because that's relaxing to me, is to be able to sit and read. So on here, one of the best books for real estate investing as a business is The E-Myth for Real Estate Investors by Gerber and Than Merrill. Than Merrill was actually one of my coaches earlier on. So that's a really good one for you to understand kind of the process of going through real estate investing. And then the next one for starting out is, hold on. The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. And Find Your Why by Simon Sinek. You need to know your end goal. You need to know why you're doing anything so that you'll stay motivated. And depending on which side you choose to go to, if you are looking to, say, learn about multifamily and learn about syndication, Michael Blanc, by and large, has one of the most robust learning curriculum, is probably the best word for it, for the least amount of money. You can get his apartment syndication, learning apartments and multifamily, $1,500. And it's online. You can do it at your own course. And he has been in it and learned his, like us, he has his price tags too. So he's learned, but he's honest about it. Many of the times you'll read a book and it's all good stuff, never the bad stuff. He's honest and he'll tell you, if you don't want to pay this price tag, ask me how I know. Then, you know, and so the other thing is, if you're not a reader, audiobooks. If you guys sit in your car, you drive your kids back and forth to sports, you go to work, you commute, turn an audiobook on. You can still get through a book. You can even bookmark them. My library is a phenomenal library system, and I can check out audiobooks all day long for free. I know others use Audible and different ones like that, but audiobooks are huge to kind of plow through some information fairly quickly and then determine if you want the hard copy. I'm a tactile. I love having the hard copy, but I can't keep them all in my RV, and my husband is like, I'm not allowed to bring any more books in. So I have to be conscientious of that. And so now I do digital, and I listen to them first and determine if I want the hard copy.
Thank you. Thank you. So Peter wants to know, which Michael Blanc course was that?
I'm sorry, which what?
Which Michael Blanc course was that?
It's called the Apartment Syndication course. It used to be called the Ultimate Apartment Guide to Investing, something like that. Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions?
I had a few on. So I read Joe Fairless' book on syndication, and the asset management part of it sounds really interesting to me. So if you're finding a deal, you want to put in an offer, you have to have some kind of money up front. I'm not talking about the down payment, but like closing costs, inspection, and all that. Where is that money coming from? Are the investors going to put up the money for that? And if the deal falls apart, they lose that money for the inspection and all that?
So that example, the one where I showed you the $196,000,
Mm-hmm.
that was exactly what that was. That was earnest money. That was inspections, appraisals, all of that. And that was all put up by our GP team. So different syndicators will do it differently. And this is a really good question, Eric, that you want to pay attention to, because some of the syndicators will be like, well, we don't want to put anything at risk. So they'll raise the money and it'll be part of the syndication. But then if something happens and the deal goes sideways, those investors are out that money and they put it back on them. We ate every bit of that. Not one investor lost a dime on that. It was all us. Our GP team chose to do that.
And probably ideally, it should be on the GP team, correct?
Well, for the most part, you would think that that would make common sense because the investors have nothing to do with if a deal goes south or doesn't, right? It's not their fault. Just like it wasn't our fault that the lender did what they did, but we're the ones choosing to do business, right?
So,
The passive investors are not choosing that. So we need to recognize that and put responsibility where it should be. And that's what we do, is take extreme ownership in those areas.
and I think that's the general area I want to go. Maybe not do a syndication, but if someone brought up the idea of a fund or at least partnering with someone. But if I don't have the funds to do those upfront costs, I think of another way I could get started.
So there's a few different ways, and that's one of the things that our credit hacking business, we actually teach people. Most people don't realize that they actually do have money. They're just only looking in their checking account and it says zero. So they're like, I don't have any money. They don't realize that they do have money. A lot of times, most people are unaware you can take loans out on your 401k. Most people are unaware you can take home equity lines of credit. They don't even know how to do that. Other times, people are unaware that, for instance, maybe you need $10,000 to get your fund up and going. Okay. Oftentimes, you can get credit lines on a credit card, and you can use funds off of there. And the moment you get your fund up and going, you can get reimbursed for that. So you only need to have it temporarily.
Yeah.
You don't need to have it for the whole time. So there's lots of different ways. But the other thing too is you can always partner. There is cost, and you need to have capital, and you need to have access to capital. And that's one of the things that our credit hacking business is. So many times people just don't set themselves up for success, so they don't have access to capital. You need to be able to have access to capital, because without that, not only every lender is going to look at you, every member on the GP team, they look at. So if you're part of that asset management, if you're part of the team, they're going to be looking at your credentials. They're looking at your credit check. They're doing background checks. They're doing all kinds of things. So you need to be up to that level of scrutiny. So a lot of times we'll make sure all of our lenders or our GP team, if some of them have some credit issues, we literally for free will take care of their credit issues just to make sure that our team looks good before that lender goes through the rigmarole and all that.
Yeah. Kind of lost what I was going to say, but yeah, it sounds. I had a feeling I need to have some funds of my own or some kind of source, because otherwise I was going to see if I could help raise capital for others. So I started making some connections through social media, but you're still talking with strangers who may or may not want to commit. And there's a couple websites you can use out there too to raise capital from. Connect with high net worth people. I don't know what the success rate is with those sites either.
Yeah, you have to figure the best kind of the rule of thumb is the least amount of work that's involved usually gets the lowest return. So for instance, me going and talking to you one-on-one and having a conversation and talking about a syndication and what our deal is and what's going on and how this is going to work almost always has a much higher rate of return on my time and energy invested in that than me putting out a Facebook ad and getting 5,000 clicks. Right. Most of the time, the return on that dollar value return is super low.
Okay.
Yeah, so your best thing, honestly, to do is to go Go to your local RIAs, go to your local meetups, start talking to people, start hanging out. I know people that have joined yacht clubs just to hang around high net worth individuals. I know others that joined cigar smoking clubs because that's where they all hung out. So, I mean, just different things like that, just to give themselves a place to meet other people.
Okay. Well, I've been working from home and looking for social outlets, so that's a good excuse anyway.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Before we answer the question, maybe answer the question. Before we answer the question, please put your cameras on. I'd like to take a zoom in a picture. Everybody, please put your camera on if you're available. Does anybody hear me? Everybody, let me put my hand on my mouth. Please put your camera. Oh, somebody walking in Texas. Please put your camera on. Thank you kindly. Okay. Everybody smile. I like that. They'll smile. One more time again. I'd like to take two. Thank you, sir, for coming on. Don't turn sideways. Thank you, sir. It's a finish. Very good. Okay, Phil. Hold it right there. Smile. Thank you kindly. Thank you. Thank you, Christine Shabazz, for taking the time from breaking for your walk. Thank you.
No problem.
Does anybody have any questions for Brittany? I mean, for Brittany. Bethany. What is that? I'm talking about some other church. Bethany. It's Kay?
Charisma's talking, but we can't hear her.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I said, how did you find your coach? How did you find someone that lined up with you that didn't just take your money or?
Well, there's a coach for everything nowadays, and there's always someone that's willing to take your money, right? So for me, I have learned, how do I describe it? I've always learned the value of a good coach, and the value of a good coach doesn't always have the cheapest price tag. So when you actually start comparing apples to oranges, and you actually start looking at coaches, well, this coach is offering this coach is offering this. So then you have to envision where you'll be at the end of that coaching experience and where you'll be at the end of this other coaching experience, and then determine, okay, this one's going to, so the difference for me is when I originally heard one of my coaches, because I've had lots of coaches through the years, one of my coaches, we did Fortune Builders. They did a radio announcement, come here, a 2-hour free presentation. And that's how I originally heard about them. There was plenty of other people, but I actually heard them. And when I looked at their program and all that their program offered, it was worth it to me to pay all of that up front, because I was going to be much further along than if I just nickeled and dimed it. Just like if you are a landlord, you can nickel and dime a unit, or you can just dive in, do the whole work, and start scratch from the beginning. So I could have learned, a much cheaper way, but it would have been a much slower process. I'm not like some of you guys. You guys are young. I'm old. I ain't got time for all that. So I needed to hit the ground running, and I needed to do it fast. So I basically looked at that.
Lawrence's face when you said you said we're old.
Thank you, Bethany. I love that.
Thank you. I've heard a lot of people that did that company with some mixed reviews, but it seems like for the most part, most of them are doing very well.
What I found with everything, those people that actually apply the learning usually don't have regrets. It's the people that don't apply the learning, usually, or they're just bad mouthing it because it's their way of justifying them not doing the work. So that was the difference. I had a whole group of people that I went through that program with, and those of us that applied it, man, we hit the ground running, and it was night and day difference. Those others, they're still not even off the ground. They're still back at the starting line. And it's not because they didn't have the same education we did. We just applied the education. We actually, put it into practice.
That I was about to say, people, they don't get out something because what you put in is what you get out. That's
yes.
simple. You put nothing into it, You don't take no advice, you're gonna get out. Nothing. You just took no advice out of it. That's all. Thank you, Bethany. So, does anybody else have any
Yes.
other questions? Bill, Lena,
I would,
James? Yeah,
I
Phil.
would just say the HELOC is sort of what I've been rolling around in my head because my wife started a business about 3 years ago. So all my credit cards are sort of pointed towards her and investing in her. So the only money I've got, is HELOC. And so I was thinking about doing that and syndication because I could possibly give away equity. So I don't have to have as much capital to raise and try to raise capital that way is my thought process rather than trying to private invest because I don't the numbers that I worked out with private investing sort of matched HELOCs. I'm not really making anything, is what I seem to determine. But the question is sort of with a HELOC, is that the sort of better way to go? Or would you say go into more of getting a coach and working out that way and then finding ways to be creative with my financing through a coach and raising capital just finding challenges of finding other ways other than because I'm in technical sales, trying to increase my sales guys' quota so I get more kickback too. And so I'm working on that
Sure.
and training them, but that's a longer, slower process.
Right. So it's twofold there. It depends on what you're wanting to do. For instance, if your ultimate end goal is you want to be on the GP side of a deal, I always encourage people to go into a multifamily syndication on the LP side. One of the things that we do is, again, we're an open book with all of our LP investors. If you're not invested on the deal, we're not talking to you about that. We're only talking to our investors about specifics of a deal. And so a lot of our investors, that's how they learn. They come in and they learn hands on. And then the next time we have another deal come along, the next time they have they've got funds to invest because they've already got usually some payout from the one and they're just turning around and reinvesting it. Or we have other programs available. So for instance, we have some of our investors that come in as little as $10,000. Now it's not a multifamily syndication. What it is that's on the executive rental side. But that executive rental side gives them an opportunity to see how to get started on a small scale and then not go on a big scale. It just depends how involved they want to be. So for instance, if your HELOC, let's say your HELOC, it costs you 5%. Okay. If you get invested in our multifamily syndications, our average annual weighted return is anywhere between 14 and 20%. So you're pocketing all that difference, right, between that 5%. If you, for instance, on a HELOC, did something smaller. So some of our folks, when they get a HELOC, what they do is they invest part of it into a multifamily syndication, and then the other part of it they invest on the either single family or executive rental side because those ones are quicker turns around, and then they use that to build up more capital and more equity and to cover like their HELOC expenses, right? You have monthly payments and things of that nature. And then they're pocketing, so all that difference that they're pocketing on our executive rental side, it's usually about a 12% or more return. Well, if your HELOC's 5%, you've got 7% you're pocketing. Then they just turn around and they create a bigger pool that they're keeping that money for. And then the next opportunity that comes along, now they have capital and they're just slowly building out their pot. So a lot of our younger generation that is learning how to invest, that's what they do is they almost all of them have about $10,000 in a 401k. They take a loan out against it. Then they turn around and they invest that. And then all of the extra, then they're just setting aside. They're really good about it. And they set that money aside. And then when they get that up to say 50,000, which is usually the minimum on a multifamily, well, then they turn around and drop it in there. And then again, they pocket all of the money that they're getting from their cash flow. They're not touching. And they turn around and they take that cash flow and they use that again to rinse and repeat and create more capital. So they aren't leaving their job. They're not having to do, they don't want any of that stuff. Their goal is different. So it depends on what your goal is. If you're wanting to learn how to go active on the GP side, or if your goal is just to create more capital, there's lots of avenues to both.
I enjoy what my job has provided, but I'm not passionate about it. I have larger goals to create wealth, similar to you. I met you, Kingdom REI, and that's sort of my passion as well. I was a missionary in the Dominican, so I've still got friends down there I want to support. I want to build a missionary house there. I believe God's put a vision on me to sort of take in women that have babies and sort of gotten kicked out of their family. So I need houses and places for them to stay. I just, bigger dreams, bigger vision. And I don't really want to do IT for the rest of my life. So yeah, my plan is to get into general partner and run syndication. I enjoy teaching and training. So I also want to do that, similar to what you're doing, is being out there, being open to teach and train people in my circle, people that God puts in my place. So that's the bigger goals. And I try to, I'm very conservative. I don't really take risks. Hence the reason I took a year off. I started listening to Grant Cardone, got kicked off with his 10X stuff, and invested in that a little bit. But the kids were my focus for really the last year, because my kids are 6, 4, and 3, so they are little. It takes a lot of time and effort. Don't want to be completely a non-parent. So that's a lot of info. But yeah, so I have bigger visions to be a general partner, to run multifamily, because I didn't want to get into wholesaling. I almost did that, and I just felt that wasn't really what I wanted to do. And now understanding multiplication 10 times, yeah, my goal is to get in general partnership. And so, yeah.
So here's the thing about that. And Eric, you were mentioning this as well. And so one of the things, you have to bring value to a team. So if you have no experience whatsoever, you've never done anything, the team there's no reason for them to give up part of their GP partnership to you to bring you on board. But if you're bringing capital, like you've got 10 investors who's going to come alongside you, you don't have to start a fund to bring those investors in. You can just bring the capital inside, and you're can be part of the GP team, and you're going to have to take care of investor relations, because you're going to have to take care of those people. You're going to have to take care of possibly other people on your team, but they're willing to give up. Even 0.5% of a GP partnership is more than zero. Anything is better than nothing. And sometimes in the early stages, I worked for free just to learn, because the education was of value to me. And now I have that experience under my belt, right? So if you're able to come alongside and you're willing to learn, or you're willing to, make phone calls, or you just want to think about what you can offer the team and how you can make it happen and what you've done in the past. So I was just listening to, I'm not sure if you guys know who Bronson Hill is.
Yes, I'm going to the Atlanta show and started following him off of Kingdom REI, Abel Pacheco,
Yes.
An apartment educator. So
Yeah, Abel and I have worked together for a long time. And Abel just has killed it this year. I'm so proud of what he's been doing and working on. But what Bronson was just saying, how there was a time he actually worked under Michael Blanc. And he actually came on board and worked under him just so he could learn, and just so he could be around people. And he said that was one of the best growth years he ever had, was because of all the things that he gained. He was able to implement immediately and run with it. And now he's doing amazing things with Bronson Equity and things that he would have never done had he not been willing to work under someone like Michael Blanc or something of that nature.
So what can be offered? Is that sort of like internship, like you're willing to work for free and just do some work, calling people and setting up appointments or doing whatever?
Yeah, so sometimes it's when we have people that have no experience whatsoever, but they're willing to work, we do call it an internship. They're not going to be listed on the GP, but what it does is it brings that level of referral, because then the next time that same team closes a deal, they already know that you worked your tail end off, and because of it, now they're willing to bring you on board on the GP side, right? It becomes a referral that now you can let some other group know, yeah, I did this and this and this for Bethany's group, and we give a referral to that other group and we let them know, and then they're willing to pick you up and have you do some things like that. So it's just like a resume, right? It's a track record. And then somewhere to back it up. It's not just you saying it.
No, that's what I'm starting to do. Hence the reason I've hit you up on LinkedIn and Bronson, and going to the networking event in Atlanta. This is, like you said, I understand it requires networking. I've joined probably 7 meetup groups, trying to find some local ones that are focused on multifamily. A lot of them are single family. So trying to find multifamily, because I don't want to not waste time, but I want to be focused on what I'm trying to accomplish. So if you have an internship open, I am available to help.
Yeah. Well, Phil, it's good to know. That's always good to know. So I will definitely, I'm not sure if we're already connected on LinkedIn. I did see your link in there, so
Yeah.
I'll definitely check and reach out for sure.
Cool. Appreciate it. Thanks for just time. So I know this time is money, so I appreciate you coming on and offering time and some experience, because those are some golden nuggets you provided. So definitely appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Phil, for coming on too. Because time is, the 3 kids been in a tub. And
That's right. Are they in bed now?
Yes, I'm in the basement now, so because I didn't want to wake them up. But will this actually, you guys recorded this? Will this be sent out? Because I missed some of it doing books and other things with the kiddos.
Yeah, this is recorded, but
Sweet.
I have a method to my madness. So this will not be out till the end of the month, till the middle of November, right? Because what happens is, I find that if you leave it up and put it out right away, then why'd I come to the meetup for? I can wait till it comes out recorded, right? So you got to be here to see it.
Hey, I got to ask a question, so I'm good.
That's right. That's right.
That's
you learn much more when you show up.
Exactly.
That's right.
Stay 20 minutes, come 20 minutes early, 15 minutes early, and stay 15 minutes late. Right? This is called, I didn't start the recording. Embarrassing. See, this is what happens. You get caught up in the moment. I got caught up in talking and listening, and I forgot. So Bethany, I want to say again, we're not going to go no place, but I was going to close the recording off. So Bethany, I want to thank you for coming on tonight. Like Phil said, time is money. I appreciate you taking your time to come on and sprinkle the dust, the knowledge dust all over us tonight, right? And I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. The financial independence, the small and investing.